Would a war be capable of destroying our planet to the point of extinguishing humanity? In other words, could weapons created by humans bring about the end of the species that invented them? Science does not have a definitive answer to this question, and we hope to never have to find out in practice. But the question remains because there are many variables at play, and most of them depend on the unpredictable behavior of human beings. But what we are sure of is that the consequences of a nuclear war would be catastrophic for life on the planet, and would go far beyond the impact of the bomb itself, which would already be gigantic. Smoke and radiation would cause severe harm to the health of survivors. The crops would be polluted, spreading hunger to every part of the world. The ozone layer would be destroyed and a climatic catastrophe would threaten life here permanently. The so-called nuclear winter could potentially lead to the death of approximately 5 billion people, in addition to all the other species that coexist on the planet with us. All this risk, dormant in recent decades, has come back to haunt us due to the wars that have erupted worldwide in recent years. In the case of the war in Ukraine, for instance, attacks near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, caused fear of an unprecedented disaster. The possibility of involvement of NATO member countries also raised the red alert for the risk of a war escalation that could be devastating. We're living in a time of nuclear fear, the biggest since the end of the Cold War. But what many people don't know is that one of the most terrifying mechanisms of this period, developed by the Soviet Union, is still in operation today. It is the system that is known in English as dead hand. But to discuss what the dead hand is, we first need to comprehend the context that led to the creation of this system with devastating potential. At the end of World War II in 1945, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two major world powers. They had united to defeat Nazism and fascism, but now that the war was finished, it was time to resolve the disagreements between the two powers. The United States represented capitalism, while the Soviet Union symbolized socialism. The countries did not engage in direct confrontation with each other, but they competed for global hegemony in various ways. A few of them were even positive and highly advantageous for science, such as in the case of the space race. It was during this time that the two countries competed year after year for exploration beyond our planet. The Soviets, for example, were the first to send a man into space. It was Yuri Gagarin in 1961. The United States emerged as the victor in the race to the moon when American astronaut Neil Armstrong made history by being the first human to set foot on our natural satellite in 1969, marking a monumental achievement for humanity and a defining moment in space exploration. But here on Earth, the dispute between the two nations was much more tense, and it seemed like it would escalate into a real war at any moment. One of the most delicate moments was certainly the Cuban Missile Crisis, an episode in which the world came very close to a nuclear war. And the scariest thing is that this didn't happen because of one individual who sort of rescued humanity. At that time, the USSR had nuclear missiles in Cuba, less than 200 kilometers from the coast of the United States, in an allied country. The Americans, of course, demanded the immediate withdrawal of the weapons from there. And then came October 27, 1962, when one of the Soviet submarines patrolling the region lost contact with the rest of the fleet. It was a technical problem, as the vessel had been designed for icy waters of the Northern Hemisphere, not for warm Caribbean waters. However, in the midst of the missile crisis, the crew believed that the loss of communication indicated that the war had indeed started. So they resorted to the protocol that authorized an immediate response, the firing of a nuclear torpedo. However, the rule stated that, in order to launch the torpedo, it was necessary for the three highest-ranking officers on the submarine to approve the decision. Two of them agreed. A third one voted against. It was Officer Vasily Arkhipov, and he remained calm and prevented what could have started the greatest nuclear tragedy in human history. But 2 decades later, a new episode once again put the world on alert for the risk of a catastrophe. In 1983, American President Ronald Reagan announced the launch of a bold and innovative military program. The idea was to install satellites around the Earth equipped with laser cannons to defend the country from possible missiles. The project seemed like it came from a sci-fi movie, so much that it earned the nickname Star Wars. The plan was never put into practice, but it ended up serving to fuel the arms race. And then the Soviet Union decided to create a defense system with a very bizarre proposal. The goal was to ensure that even if the country were targeted by a mass destruction attack, the Soviets could counterattack even after death. In other words, a mechanism capable of automatic retaliation, resulting in the adversary's extermination as revenge after their own extermination occurs. It was as if it were a hand capable of pressing a button even when dead. That's why the nickname Dead Hand. And this mechanism was officially designated as perimeter, and it went into operation in the year 1985. It was developed based on the system that is commonly referred to as dead man's switch, which is a safety feature used in various industries. It is a concept that serves to perform an action based on the absence of an order for an action to be executed. It is an automated system that acts when it realizes no human can make the decision due to their absence. And this mechanism appears in many places beyond wars, like in autonomous cars, for example. In some models, when the driver activates the cruise control, he needs to touch the steering wheel every 30 seconds. If this doesn't happen, an alarm starts to sound. And if no one touches the steering wheel for a minute, the system automatically parks the car. And this also occurs in computing, more specifically in information security. Sensitive data can be safeguarded using the dead man switch mechanism. The owner of a file needs to execute a certain command from time to time so that the data continues to be saved. If something happens to the person and they can no longer perform this task, the mechanism automatically encrypts or even deletes that information. And this idea has also appeared a few times in fiction. Those who watched Lost remember the computer where it was necessary to enter a certain code every 108 minutes to keep an electromagnetic charge contained under the island. And when that wasn't done, well, I won't spoil it, if there's even such a thing as spoilers for a 20-year-old series. And there's also Stanley Kubrick's classic film Dr. Strangelove. He deals precisely with an auto mass destruction system based on the concept of the dead man switch. But going back to real life and real war, how exactly does the dead hand developed by the Soviet Union work? The system was programmed based on 4 computer codes of the if-then type. It is a theoretically simple programming used in any spreadsheet nowadays, in which if a certain data is presented, then a certain action must be executed. This basically means that an Excel would decide whether the planet Earth should be destroyed or not. And these were the 4 propositions analyzed by perimeter. First, if the system is on, it detects a nuclear attack hitting Soviet soil. To arrive at this answer, the system analyzed levels of radioactivity, lighting, atmospheric pressure, and even seismic activity in the territory. If the system concluded that there was an attack, it would move on to the second proposition. If there is an attack, check the communication networks with the war room, which is the command post where the highest Soviet military authorities would already be. Then came the third proposition. If there is communication with the war room, disarm the system itself. After all, in this case, Dead Hand understood that the Soviet commanders were alive and capable of deciding for themselves what should be done from that point on. But in all other respects, it reached the fourth and final proposition. If communication with the war room has been lost, transfer authority to the on-duty operator. In other words, the system immediately discarded the entire command hierarchy of the country and sent a signal to an agent who was protected in a bunker. An interesting fact, the exact location of this bunker is unknown, but it is believed to be hidden inside Mount Kosvinsk, a highly isolated and frozen region in the heart of Russian territory. And it would be up to the military officer on duty who received this alert to make a very simple decision: to start or not to start a global nuclear hecatomb. That's it. If no response was given, maybe the soldier was using the bathroom at that time, the system could possibly automatically choose to initiate the counterattack. And I say could because this is not a consensus among researchers on this subject. Some sources say that the final shot would only be taken with the approval of this on-duty military personnel, but others say that the system was developed with the ability to be completely autonomous. And it's possible to grasp the reason for all this mystery, but be that as it may, what would occur if the counterattack were authorized? First, the system would launch a command rocket. This rocket is equipped with a radiation-resistant radio transmitter. He would then cross the country's airspace by sending a firing signal to all the silos, which are the military facilities where the missiles are stored. In other words, this rocket is a kind of messenger that crosses the sky, sending an order for all missiles to be fired automatically. This could potentially mean hundreds of intercontinental missiles loaded with nuclear warheads being fired simultaneously and directed towards a predetermined target. During the Cold War, the United States was the most likely target. Russian military officials claimed they could destroy the United States in just 30 minutes. But currently, nothing would stop the system from being programmed to target not just the United States, but also European countries or any other nation worldwide that oppose the Russians, starting an apocalypse that could wipe out the entire Earth's population. I highlight today because it is worth remembering Dead Hand still exists. By the way, it is not only working, but it is also being improved, according to Bruce Blair, one of the world's leading authorities on nuclear weapons combat. The engineers have already updated the system, for example, to prevent new technologies from allowing the interception of the radio signal from the messenger rocket. Yet Russia isn't the sole nation with an ace up its sleeve for retaliating in the event of a nuclear attack. Another current example is the United Kingdom, which has not only one but 4 letters. These are the so-called last resort letters. It is a set of identical texts handwritten by the British Prime Minister. Each one of them is delivered in a sealed envelope to the commanders of the 4 missile-equipped submarines of the British military forces. And in these letters, the Prime Minister instructs exactly what should be done if a nuclear attack destroys the country and the British government is eliminated. And do you want to know what these instructions are? Me too, because I am not one of the submarine commanders. And the content of the letters is extremely confidential. In fact, at the end of each Prime Minister's term, the letters are destroyed still sealed. However, a BBC documentary has already unveiled some options that the rulers could incorporate in their texts. And some of them are: do nothing, decide for themselves, forfeit the submarine's control to an allied nation like the US, or strike back with nuclear weapons. Just like in the case of Dead Hand, this last option would certainly lead to a global escalation of violence never seen before. On the one hand, the existence of such powerful mechanisms can make us believe that the end of our planet is about to come. But on the other hand, however unusual it may seem, the large number of weapons of mass destruction is exactly what helps to maintain peace globally. If a country knows its adversary has nuclear weapons, it will not want to attack that other country. After all, retaliation would be immediate, and the attacking country itself would also be annihilated. This concept emerged during the Cold War, and it became known as mutually assured destruction, in the acronym MAD, a fitting name for an insane concept based on the old war principle that the best defense is a good offense, or, in this case, the mere possibility of attack. It's a paradox. After all, it's strange to think that nuclear weapons can guarantee peace. The problem is that it is an extremely delicate and totally unstable type of peace. Just one hot-headed action taken by a world leader like an unbalanced ruler about to lose power is enough to start a devastating domino effect. An inconsequential action that could trigger a series of attacks capable of ruining an entire world, turning our planet into a true wasteland. Years of achievements and advancements would be discarded, and humanity would almost revert to square one of its progress on Earth. It's a scary risk that reminds us of a famous quote attributed to Einstein. It goes, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Thank you, and see you next time.